Picture this, it's 1944. Somewhere in war-torn France, just miles behind the front lines. The thunder of artillery shakes the ground. And in a converted barn, by the light of a kerosene lamp, a young nurse opens a small leather journal. Her hands are stained with blood. Her eyes are hollow from sleeplessness. But she writes. She writes because she must. Because someone, someday, needs to know the truth. This is the story of that diary. A document that remained hidden for 70 years. A testament to the courage, the horror, and the impossible choices made by those who served in the field hospitals of World War II. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and the diary I'm about to share with you belonged to my grandmother, Lieutenant Margaret Hayes, a surgical nurse with the 45th Field Hospital Unit. What she witnessed, what she endured, and what she was forced to keep secret, changed her forever. Margaret Hayes was 23 years old when she enlisted in the Army Nurse Corps in 1942. She came from a small town in Pennsylvania, the daughter of a schoolteacher and a factory worker. In her diary, she describes herself as hopelessly naive about what war really meant. Her training was rigorous but sanitized. They learned about triage, wound care, surgical assistance. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could prepare them for the reality of a field hospital under combat conditions. Margaret's first entry after arriving in North Africa reads simply, "We are not in Kansas anymore." The field hospitals were set up in whatever structures remained standing, warehouses, schools, barns. Sometimes just tents. They operated within artillery range, close enough to the front that wounded soldiers could reach them quickly. Close enough that they could hear the fighting. Close enough that they were in constant danger. In one entry from December 1943, Margaret writes about her first night on duty. "The wounded came in waves. Not soldiers, not anymore. Just broken boys screaming for their mothers. We had 40 beds. We treated 120 men that night. The floor was slippery with blood. We ran out of morphine by midnight. I held a boy's hand while he died. He was 19. I never learned his name." The medical staff worked 20-hour shifts, sometimes longer during major offensives. They performed surgery in conditions that would horrify modern doctors: makeshift operating tables, limited anesthesia, inadequate lighting, and a chronic shortage of supplies. But the physical challenges were only part of the story. The real secrets Margaret documented were far darker. In modern hospitals, every patient receives care. In a field hospital during World War II, this was impossible. The doctors and nurses had to make choices, terrible, haunting choices about who would live and who would die. This was the triage system. And it was the first secret that haunted Margaret Hayes. Incoming wounded were sorted into 3 categories. The first category, soldiers with minor wounds who could be treated quickly and returned to duty. The second, seriously wounded men who had a chance of survival with immediate surgery. The third category. In her diary, Margaret calls them the expectants. These were men with injuries so severe that, given the limited resources, they had virtually no chance of survival. Men with catastrophic head wounds, massive internal injuries, severe burns covering most of their bodies. In a fully equipped hospital with unlimited staff and supplies, some might have been saved. But here, in the chaos of war, they were deemed beyond help. The expectants were given morphine to ease their pain and moved to a separate area, what Margaret called the waiting room, where they would die as peacefully as possible, while the medical staff focused on those who could be saved. Margaret's entry from January 1944 is particularly devastating. "I held morphine in my hand today and made a decision I'll never forgive myself for. 2 boys came in together, both with abdominal wounds. We only had 1 surgical team available. Captain Reynolds looked at them both for 30 seconds and pointed to one. 'That one,' he said. The other boy, maybe 17 years old, grabbed my arm. "Please," he said. Just that word. "Please." I gave him morphine and told him we'd be back for him. We both knew I was lying. He died 2 hours later. The boy we operated on survived. Did I make the right choice? Captain Reynolds says there is no right choice. But I was the one who looked that boy in the eyes and lied to him. The triage decisions were just the beginning. Margaret's diary reveals other secrets, unwritten rules that governed life in the field hospitals. Rules that were never officially acknowledged but that everyone understood. Rule number 1. Save the soldiers who can fight again. When resources were extremely limited, during major battles when hundreds of casualties flooded in, the medical staff prioritized young, otherwise healthy soldiers who could be patched up and sent back to the front lines. Officers received slightly better care than enlisted men. Specialist troops like pilots and engineers were prioritized over infantry. It was never written down. It was never discussed openly. But it happened. Margaret writes, "We saved a colonel today while 3 privates bled out in the next room. Nobody said anything. We all knew. This is war. This is survival. But it's also murder, dressed up in military efficiency." Rule number 2. Keep the secrets. Not all wounds were caused by enemy fire. Margaret documents cases of self-inflicted injuries, soldiers who shot themselves in the foot or hand to escape combat. These were officially treated as accidents, but the medical staff knew the truth. There were also what Margaret calls failures of courage, soldiers who broke down completely, who couldn't stop shaking, who screamed at shadows. In her diary, she describes men who were physically unharmed but psychologically destroyed. The official term was battle fatigue, or shell shock. But the reality was more complex and more tragic. Some were given sedatives and sent to rest facilities. Others were given a choice: return to duty or face court-martial for cowardice. Margaret writes about a young lieutenant who begged her for help. He couldn't stop crying. Couldn't sleep. Kept saying he'd killed children, that civilians had been in the building his squad demolished. He showed me his hands and swore they were covered in blood, but they were clean. Captain Reynolds said to sedate him and send him back in 3 days. He's an officer. We need him. I wanted to scream. This man is broken. Instead, I gave him phenobarbital and told him to rest. He returned to his unit. 2 weeks later, I heard he walked into enemy fire without his weapon. They called it killed in action. I know better. Another dark secret documented in Margaret's diary involves the treatment of enemy soldiers. The Geneva Convention required that wounded prisoners of war receive the same medical care as Allied troops. In theory, this was the rule. In practice, the reality was far more complicated. When a field hospital was overwhelmed with Allied casualties, enemy wounded were treated last. Always. Sometimes they waited days for surgery. Sometimes they died waiting. Margaret's diary contains several entries about this moral dilemma. In one, from June 1944, shortly after D-Day, we had 42 Americans and 12 Germans. All critical. We started with the Americans. Always the Americans. By the time we finished, 6 of the Germans were dead. The chaplain said a prayer over their bodies. I wanted to feel guilty. I wanted to feel something. But I was too numb. These men were trying to kill us yesterday. Today we're supposed to save them. The contradiction is unbearable. But Margaret also documents moments of unexpected humanity. She writes about a German soldier, barely 18, who received a blood transfusion from an American sergeant who had died on the operating table. The boy didn't know. He was unconscious. But when he woke up, I told him. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted him to understand the cost. He started crying. American blood, he kept saying. American blood in my veins. He survived. I wonder if he ever told anyone. I wonder if it changed him. There were also cases of medical staff refusing to treat certain prisoners, SS officers, or soldiers suspected of war crimes. This was against regulations, but Margaret notes that it happened, and that officers sometimes looked the other way. We are supposed to be healers, she writes. But we are also human. And humans hold grudges. Even against dying men. By early 1945, Margaret Hayes had been serving in field hospitals for over 2 years. Her diary entries from this period are shorter, darker, increasingly fragmented. The constant exposure to death and suffering took its toll on everyone. Medical staff developed what we would now recognize as PTSD, nightmares, emotional numbness, difficulty forming connections. Margaret writes about nurses who started drinking heavily. Doctors who made mistakes because they were too exhausted to think straight. Staff members who had complete breakdowns and were quietly reassigned. She also reveals the existence of what she calls the mercy room. This was an unofficial practice in some field hospitals, a separate area where the most hopeless cases were given fatal doses of morphine to end their suffering quickly. It was euthanasia. It was illegal. And it was never officially acknowledged. Margaret's entry from February 1945. Captain Reynolds asked me to make comfortable a boy with burns over 90% of his body. We both knew what he meant. I stood there with the morphine, my hands shaking. This boy was conscious. In agony. Begging us to end it. We had no skin grafts. No way to save him. He would die in days, in unspeakable pain. Or he would die in minutes peacefully. I administered the dose. I watched him slip away. I became a killer today. They'll probably give me a commendation. This is perhaps the darkest secret in Margaret's diary, the revelation that euthanasia, while never sanctioned, occurred in field hospitals when doctors and nurses felt there was no other humane option. She writes, "We are trained to preserve life. But sometimes the most merciful thing we can do is allow death. I don't expect anyone to understand. I don't expect forgiveness. But I need to write this down. Someone needs to know that we didn't make these choices lightly. That they destroyed us as surely as they released those poor boys from suffering." Margaret Hayes returned home in October 1945. She was 26 years old. She had aged 20 years. Her final diary entry, written on the ship home, reads, "I don't know how to be normal anymore. How to care about ordinary things. How to talk to people who weren't there. They'll ask me what it was like, and I'll smile and say difficult but rewarding. I'll never tell them the truth. About the choices we made. The secrets we kept. The boys we couldn't save. The boys we chose not to save. I'm bringing this diary home, but I'll never show it to anyone. These secrets should die with us. We earn that much. But secrets have a way of surviving." Margaret kept that diary hidden for her entire life. She married, raised 3 children, worked as a school nurse. She was, by all accounts, a kind and gentle woman. But my mother told me that grandmother would sometimes wake up screaming. That she couldn't watch war movies. That she never, ever talked about her service. When she died in 2015 at age 96, we found the diary in a locked box in her attic. Along with it was a letter addressed to whoever reads this. In it she wrote, "I kept these secrets to protect my fellow nurses and doctors. To protect the families of the soldiers who died. To protect myself. But secrets are burdens, and I'm tired of carrying them. If you're reading this, then I'm gone, and maybe it's time the truth was known. We did terrible things. We also did heroic things. Sometimes they were the same things. Judge us if you must. But remember, we were human beings in an impossible situation, trying to save lives in the middle of hell. The field hospitals of World War II saved countless lives. They also held countless secrets, secrets about the impossible choices made under unimaginable pressure. Secrets about the cost of war, not just on the battlefield, but in the tents and barns where young nurses and doctors tried to piece broken bodies and shattered souls back together. Margaret Hayes's diary is now part of the National Archives, a testament to the courage and the anguish of those who served. A reminder that war doesn't just create heroes and villains. It creates moral complexity. And sometimes, the bravest thing we can do is simply tell the truth about what we've endured.